Brian Neville is my name. I'm a professor of child neurology at University College. That's the Institute of Child Health, London. By being president of ENRA and also of the local organisation for the UK. Yes, I think so. It was, I think, really quite early in the 1970s to 80s, and this was partly through my association with John A. Cardy, who was prominent in that as well. So that's where I got a knowledge of that, and I recognised really quite simply there were several problems. The first was that it was very rare, but the second was that it was extremely difficult to describe precisely what happened, and it moved from one thing to another. So you would get eye movement problems, then you'd get dystonic spasms, then you'd get hemiplegias, and somewhere in the middle of this, they were also losing skills, and it wasn't really quite clear, exactly how they were losing them. So, and it was all happening on a sort of paroxysmal basis. And so this, I think, made it very much more difficult. So when somebody says that a child has dystonia, for example, they can mean any one of half a dozen things, and that needs really to be clarified. But the fact remains that it's taken really quite a long time to get this publicised and to get guidelines published, which we have done, because it's so uncommon. There were more than one, but it was growing at a rate. I mean, probably about one per year would come in to a place like Great Ormond Street, and we'd spend a lot of time sort of thinking about it. In the end, you get the notion that there isn't anything else that this could really be, but it would be difficult to recognise it, particularly early on. Very interestingly, flunarizine has been used from a very early stage, but it's only recently that there's become any sort of idea of how that might work, and it's even now uncertain from the discussions that we've been having. They're more or less similar in that and we've been really quite strict about the way the cases are named, because we want to be keeping it so that we get a proper genetic definition. And the genetic definition of this has been tremendously helpful, and so I think that's why it now means that, and this is really just, I think, in the last year or so, that all sorts of other variants of the condition are now being described, and in fact two quite separate diseases as well, so that, or what seem to be quite separate, so that I think it's really quite, there's a lot of work to be done on this, because there's a lot of patients now that are worth looking at. It's a disease in which you have a condition that evolves through various sort of stages, with probably the eye movements being one of the earliest things, and they're things that are actually often mistaken for being seizures, through different sorts of hemi and double hemiplegias. And with half of the children developing seizures, usually at a relatively later stage, and of that group being now recognised as one in which there's a high risk of them suffering both deterioration in function and possibly dying. So that it's by no means a harmless condition. One of the major aspects of it is loss of intellect, and that's largely in all patients, really, eventually. And they also have a very high behavioural problem. And we've been talking about this behaviour problems in the group that we've been sort of part of, and they raise it. And I think it means that there's really a lot that can be done, not just for children who have a problem with alternating hemiplegia, but children who have other neurological conditions like epilepsy and other. As far as we can tell, the problems seem to be identical. There is at the moment a major mismatch between the numbers of children who are being diagnosed and the total number. And so it's really important that people are given guidelines, and they're given them early, as doctors really, into what are these sets of problems, how do they manifest, and even if they are 1 in a million or 1 in 500,000, they're still nevertheless crucially important.